Hi, friends. So, this week we're going to experiment a little bit, or a lot a bit, with some crayons. A couple of videos ago, I was using crayons to color in a coloring book, and I mentioned that I had been researching different ways to work with crayons in a more elevated and professional way. And you guys let me know in the comments that you were very interested in seeing that. You also let me know that I say crayon in a funny way, but how do other people say it? Crayon? Crayon? That just sounds weird to my ears. And when I was a kid, I just called them colors. Anyway, first we need some crayons. Here I have this giant old box of crayons. It's also disgustingly dusty because I've had this since I was a kid and I don't remember the last time that I opened it. It is absolutely full of crayons and random cars for some reason. Hopefully there's nothing else weird or living in here. Or even worse, dead in here. Luckily, there's just a lot of fuzz and dust. So, like I said, I've been doing some research and I really want to try to give crayons another go. Because coloring with them is so nostalgic and simple, and it just reminds me of being a kid. But the final product isn't always as pretty as I'd like it. So maybe I can find a more interesting way to use them. Right now, I'm just sorting all of these into 3 trays. Crayola, not Crayola, and unknown. I'm allergic to wasting things, so I didn't want to go out and re-buy crayons when I have a buttload sitting right here. But I do want to stick to using Crayola since they seem to be universally recognized as the best. Then, after all of that sorting, because my brain cannot stop being extra, I went through the Crayola tray again and only kept the ones with visible names. Anything that didn't have a name anymore just got thrown into that miscellaneous tray. I'll probably melt all of these down in silicone molds to make new, fun crayons for my classroom. Because I don't know if you've ever met preschoolers, but they go through crayons super fast. Alright. Now that we got that boring task out of the way, I'm going to do some testing. I decided to use watercolor paper because I read that because it has more tooth, it's better for crayons. Also, because I am going to be using some liquids, it will help with that. And this is not the finest watercolor paper that I have, but it is the biggest, and I wanted lots of real estate. I'm going to use the same 3 colors for each test, making a little gradient from light orange to a sort of dark red. And I did sharpen the crayons first with a pencil sharpener, just so that I had more control over where the color went. Also, it made a giant mess. The first box here is going to be my control. This is where I'm just going to color as I normally would. Sort of a medium pressure, not hard enough to hurt my hand, keeping all of the strokes in the same direction, using the side of the crayon instead of the point. And I did a couple of layers, overlapping the color. Now for the next box, the first test, I colored the exact same gradient in the exact same way. But then, I'm going to take a white crayon, a very stained white crayon, because that is not paper on it, and I'm going to gently go over the whole thing in small circular strokes. I'm basically burnishing this the same way that you might burnish over colored pencil with a white colored pencil. I used a little bit heavier pressure than I did when coloring, but I'm still not pressing hard because I don't want to add a ton of color over the whole thing. I'm just sort of moving the existing wax around. It's pretty slow going, and it doesn't feel particularly great on the hand, although that might be the micro size of my crayon. But it is working, to a point. I can still see the white of the paper poking through, but it definitely looks smoother and even a bit more vibrant. The next test is one that I've seen a lot. Basically, I'm just going to color really hard, really working out my hand and forearm muscles and creating a ton of crayon sprinkles, and then I'm going to scrape off the wax, leaving nice smooth color behind. Except that I cannot seem to scrape anything off. Yes, I am using tweezers because they work just fine to scrape claim codes off of gift cards, so they should work for this. But nothing is scraping. I only succeeded in gouging the paper. I don't think anything is actually coming off because there are no shavings and it still feels really waxy. Maybe the paper has too much tooth? It looks good, but it was a lot of work. Next, I'm going to test blending with a blending stump. You know those kind of suspicious looking rolls made out of paper? So I'm just working in a circular motion, and it is definitely moving the color around, even if it's leaving some paper showing through. It does feel like it's sort of scraping against the paper now and then, but I think that maybe it's just building up too much wax on the stump, because when I turn the blending stump around to a clear spot, it feels smoother. I think the fact that the paper feels less waxy than the other tests when it's done confirms that the stump is pulling up some of the wax. This technique also requires a pretty good bit of pressure, and my hand was feeling it. Next, we're going to try the blending stump again, but this time with the added help of a heat gun. Honestly, I really thought that this was going to work way better than it did. I mean, it did blend, but the wax definitely started to build up on the stump, and it started to feel super scratchy, and it made a squeaky noise. The feeling reminded me of when you'd write on a chalkboard with a particularly hard section of chalk that didn't really want to write. Shout out to all my millennial and older buddies who remember actual chalkboards in schools. Anyway, this technique didn't really move the color around as much as I thought it would, but I felt like the heat did help it to move around more than just the stump alone, so I decided I needed to try it again. But this time coloring really hard to get a lot of wax on there. I really didn't want to do it because I knew that it was going to hurt my hand, but I had to, for science. And boy, was this so much faster and smoother feeling than any of the techniques so far. I don't know that it necessarily blended the colors together, but it definitely blended the crayon itself together. It's very even, and there's absolutely not a peep of paper showing through. Also, it feels so dry and paper-like. I can't feel any wax at all. It's almost completely matte, and there's no shine to it. I colored all of the 4 next blocks at once because, I just felt like it. And even though I'm coloring them in a gradient and overlapping the colors, I don't actually care as much about the colors themselves blending together in a seamless gradient. I care more about the colors looking even and covering the paper. For the kind of art that I usually do, super gradual blends aren't too terribly important. So next, I'm going to try a blender pencil. These are made for colored pencils, and this one specifically is made for wax-based colored pencils, so I would think that this would work for wax crayons also. And it did. Kind of. I mean, it was looking good over the light orange, but honestly, the light orange blended much nicer than the other colors in every test so far. Once I got to the darker orange and the red, it struggled. Plus, blending pencils are a lot of work, even over colored pencils. I just really want something that's easy to work with. That's the fun of crayons to me anyway. They're easy. And this was not easy. And it didn't really look any better than any of the other tests. So the last few tests are wet mediums. First, we have baby oil. This one has vitamin E and aloe in it, if that helps. It also smells amazing. Anyway, I'm going to try this with Q-tips on one half and a blending stump on the other, because I saw people suggest both, and again, science. And I don't know why I didn't think this would work that well, but it actually kind of does. The Q-tip also seemed to hold a lot of oil, so I only had to dip a few times. The blending stump, on the other hand, required a lot more dips. Maybe it doesn't really hold the oil, or maybe it sucks it all up. I don't know the physics of it, but it took almost 3 times as many dips for the same area. I'm honestly shocked at how well this worked though. The baby oil didn't soak through at all, and the paper even feels dry right away. There's no oil sitting on top. Plus, it smells so good. I do think the Q-tip side blended better than the stump side, and I even went back in with a Q-tip to see if I could reblend it. Then we have Gamsol. Gamsol is an odorless mineral spirits. Oil painters use it to thin paints. I don't know because oil painting terrifies me, but I do know that colored pencil artists use it to blend pencils. And I read that it can be used to blend crayons. It says to use it in a well-ventilated area, check, and not to use around heat or flame, which is why I wanted to do this test after the heat gun. And just like with the baby oil, I'm going to try out a Q-tip and a blending stump. The Gamsol really soaks the paper way more than the baby oil, and with the paper being super wet, I can't really tell if it's blending at all. In this side angle, you can see that it is, but I was looking at this straight on, and I just couldn't see it. With the blending stump, it seemed to hold less of the solvent, just like with the baby oil, so it didn't saturate the paper quite as much. The blend seems about the same with both tools, so I think a blending stump with Gamsol is really the way to go. Next, I'm going to try alcohol. And I started with a colorless blending marker because they're basically just alcohol. It is sort of working, and it's definitely pulling something up off of the paper and onto the marker. I don't know what that is. Is that wax? For the bottom half of this block, I tried a bit of isopropyl alcohol on a Q-tip, but it didn't really seem like it worked super well. One more thing that I'm going to try is to put the blending medium down first, because I saw a video where someone recommended that. I guess you can kind of tell where the medium ends, but it doesn't really seem like it's too crazy of a difference. Now, there are a couple more things that I saw mentioned and I want to try. Supposedly, you can use an electric eraser to erase the crayon, and you could use this for highlights and such. It's not super crisp, and it's mostly just tearing up the paper, so I don't think I'll be using that trick. I want to see if you can layer more crayons over the top in case you wanted to build up or change the colors. It does work to varying degrees on every square, except the one that I supposedly scraped. I think I must have just sealed that one with my super strength when I was coloring, because even on the one that I colored hard and used a heat gun on, it still layered up a little bit. I tried reblending the ones with wet mediums just to see if it stayed darker or if it just pulled the color up. If it's just going to pull all the color up each time, there's no point in continuing to layer. Then, for kicks and giggles, I wanted to see if you could layer colored pencils over them. I'm not going to be doing that in this video, but maybe that's a technique that could be useful. It seems like an orange colored pencil shows up really well, but no such luck with a white colored pencil. Which then made me wonder if a paint marker would work. Gel pens tend to get gunked up going over anything wax-based, but the paint markers seem to have no problem. I tried to do a shine test to show you which ones were pretty waxy and which weren't, but that scientific test needs some work. So here's where we're at. Obviously, the most vibrant one is where I colored really hard and used a heat gun and a blending stump. The one that I supposedly scraped off is also pretty vibrant, but I feel like that test was a fail because I'm not sure anything actually scraped off. As far as blending, the Gamsol or the baby oil look the best. I think the Gamsol blend looks just slightly better, but the baby oil smells good. Okay, I know what I'm gonna do. So, I'm working on the same watercolor paper as before, and I drew out this little monster gal and lined her with fine liner. I also picked out all of my colors and sharpened my crayons off camera. Now, I'm gonna do this side over here with a heat gun and a blending stump. Since this technique didn't layer super well in the test, I'm going to try to do all of the coloring first and then I'll heat it up. I'm using a sort of medium to hard pressure, trying to build up the color and layer them all over each other to blend a little bit nicer. Then I went in with the blending stump and the heat gun just like I did before. What I didn't do before was go in immediately afterwards to try and layer up the color. Holy cow! Is that the trick? To color when the paper is already hot? Look at that color. I was even able to blend with the stump a little bit without the heat gun since the paper was already hot. So after finding that out, I just worked back and forth with heating and blending, adding a little bit of color here and there where I felt like it needed it. And then when I thought it looked good, I used a darker crayon to add some little hair details while the paper was still hot. I'm not going to blend these out. I did try to add some white details, but that was expecting too much. But still, dang, that looks so pretty. So now knowing that, I'm just going to go through and work in sections, adding color and blending while the paper is hot until I feel like it looks complete, and then I'll move on. Now, about this little girl. Her name is Ruby, and she is just the sweetest little cuddle bug you've ever met. She'll flap right up to you on her giant feet and settle right into your arms and just radiate love and happiness into you. But if you happen to be a jerk, a bully, any kind of hateful person, she'll wait until you least suspect it and she'll chomp down on your ankle with her one giant tooth, which is deceivingly sharp. Then she'll just tuck her feet and ears in and roll away from you like the little terror ball that she is. Do not get on her bad side. After finishing all of the coloring, I did need to clip the paper because it was getting kind of warped from all of the heat, and then I went around and cleaned up a few spots where I went outside the lines by going over it with a white paint pen. Now, on this side, I'm going to use Gamsol. I really liked the baby oil because it smelled better, but I feel like the Gamsol test just looked a touch better. If I was just doing this for fun, I would for sure use baby oil because it's less hassle and less possibly harmful, but I want to do the ultimate test. I'm coloring just like I was before with medium to hard pressure, trying to layer the colors up. And I'm kind of hoping for a really eureka moment like I had with the heat gun. Also, I am physically incapable of pouring the Gamsol without spilling. I did it every single time. I did really try to layer up the colors after I blended it out, but it's just not getting that dark. I mean, I'm coloring as hard as I can, but then that causes the problem of getting these concentrated streaks of color. Then I would try to blend those out and rub really hard, and it would pull up a lot of the color. I just kept going back and forth, but at some point, it just stopped getting any darker. And weirdly, on this side, the color looks more cool toned, even though I was using the exact same crayons on both sides. I did eventually end up using the darker crayon that I used for the hair strokes around the edge to get it a little bit darker. But then that meant that I couldn't get the hair details to really show up because now it wasn't any darker. I did end up having to use a pencil extender on my crayon to be able to keep coloring, and I tried to start way darker with way more pressure so that I won't have to layer quite as much. I think that part of the issue I was having was actually mental, because this is blending out just fine, but I'm trying to match the other side, which is more vibrant, and it's just not getting there. So I think that I should have either picked darker crayons to start with, or just accepted that it was going to be a softer colored monster. I did end up pulling out some other reds and pinks to adjust the color, and while it is getting better, the actual finish is less blendy. Probably because there's so much crayon on here now. And I had to find a really dark crayon for the fur lines. Now, the reason that I chose to draw a monster is that my friend Christine is doing a challenge on her channel, to create a monster to help defeat Artie, the evil AI robot who steals creativity. I will link her channel in my description box, but I think that Ruby can definitely help. After all of that, I of course cleaned up the edges, and Ruby is done. Okay, I finished filming, but I just watched Chloe Rose's video where she tried out retired Crayola colors, and I saw her use crayons in her coloring book. She tried the scraping method, and it worked so well for her. I'm guessing that it's a smoother paper, so I felt compelled to redo all of the tests on regular printer paper. I mean, why try to finish this video early when I can be editing right up until posting time? I also sort of wondered if the amount of crayon on the paper mattered, so I added a section in most squares, pressing really hard. This is feeling so great. I'm gonna have one super buff arm after all of this. I won't bore you with another 10 minutes of testing, so here's the highlights. The physical blending tools, the ones where I'm sort of pushing wax around, work way better on printer paper. I'm guessing since the paper is smoother, it's much easier to push the color around. However, on the halves with more wax on them, they really didn't do anything at all. The liquid blending mediums came out way worse. The baby oil just sat on top of the wax, and the Gamsol and the alcohol just soaked into the paper, but they didn't actually blend anything. So watercolor paper is the way to go for those. The area where I pressed really hard and scraped worked so much better on the smooth paper. I was actually able to scrape it. There's no blend at all, even though I overlap the colors, but I'm just glad that the scraping part worked. Using heat on the smooth paper just seemed to melt the wax into the paper. Nothing really moved, but you can see it on the other side of the paper. And using the liquid mediums first and the blender pencil kinda sucked on both papers. Also, seeing Chloe talking about retired colors made me wonder if I have any, which I do. And this particular color was retired in 1990. So does that mean some of these crayons are from the 80s? Dear Lord, I'm ancient. Alright, let's go back to this cute little lady. It's a really tough decision. The Gamsol side is much brighter and pastel-y, and it has a sort of rough, colored pencil-like look to it. The heat gun side is much more rich and vibrant, with much more variation in the colors since they blended so well. I really like her eye and this green area up here so much better on the heat gun side. She is really, really cute either way, but I think I like this side just a bit more. Of course, now I have all kinds of things that I want to try out with crayons. So what do you think? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.